Hey, welcome back to the Metropol Grid. My name is Andre. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is Terminal Directive, the campaign expansion that just came out last week, and this is the fourth video of this entire video series in which we talk about the last cards we haven't talked about, and that is the Weyland cards on the corporation side. We got a dozen or so Weyland cards and I think 2 neutrals to talk through, and that's it. You made it through everything. Thanks so much for watching to that point. Basic disclaimer, we're not talking about anything that has to do with the campaign. We're just talking about their cards and how they work in constructed play, so no spoilers anywhere. Don't worry about that. That's not going to happen. And then secondly, there are timestamps in the description below. If you want to jump to a certain card, do so, because these videos get long and I talk about things at length, so maybe you just want to hear about one card. That's cool. That's why they're there. Lastly, I kind of want to apologize. I'm recording this now. You hear that? The street outside, it rained, so cars are kind of loud on the street. We're going to be competing with that a bit. Hopefully it sounds okay. Without further ado, let's start here. This is Skorpios' defense system, Persuasive power. It's a subsidiary identity, and it has, firstly, 40 minimum deck size, and 15 influence. 40 is something we haven't seen in Weyland before, I don't believe. And this identity says, whenever a runner card is trashed from any location, you may force the runner to remove it from the game instead of adding it to the heap. Use this ability only once per turn. Before going into that ability, firstly, this identity was very, I think, polarizing, and this was kind of a big deal coming out. A lot of people were talking about it, a lot of people were fearing it, a lot of people were excited about playing it. Before we get into all that, let's just talk really quickly about the deck size. 40 deck size is generally a benefit almost universally. That's a better thing to have written down there on that part of that card. 40 deck size means you're probably running 44 cards in your deck, which means you only need 18 to 19 agenda points. Fewer agenda points doesn't really matter that much. I think 18 out of 44 is technically a slightly worse ratio than 20 out of 49, I think. Maybe it's equal. Probably around equal. But the idea is that if you have like a deck that wants to either go fast or has combos in it where it needs to find multiple cards or find like key, unique, specific cards, having less cards in your deck makes it much more likely for you to find those cards in your opening hand or at any point in the game when you draw. So that's actually really good. Having a 40 card deck size is definitely better for you because it leans and thins down your deck. Now, it's important to understand that you don't have to you have to respect the minimum deck size, but that is the minimum. So if you want to play this like a normal 49 card deck, go for it. Do 54 card deck. Nobody really cares. Just ideally 44, I think, is always the best way to do things. And so this is definitely a good thing off the bat. It also means, yeah, you're probably going to be rushing with Skorpios and playing quickly. There is some negatives to that. You do have a smaller deck size, so you're a bit more susceptible to like getting milled out by noise, playing viruses, or cards like data leak reversal. So do be a bit careful about that, and maybe you have to go faster than normal than you might be used to because you might run out of a deck at some point, but that's basically the idea. It's generally always really good. So once per turn, that's your turn and the runner's turn. Those are both different turns. You may force the runner to remove a card from the game instead of hitting the heap. So anytime a card is trashed, it's specifically when a card is trashed, not when it hits the heap, sorry. When a card is trashed, you can remove it from the game. And that's a big deal. When cards are removed from the game, they're removed from the game. And it's kind of, I find it funny how it used to be like the heap was where cards went to die, and now the heap isn't like that. The heap kind of more in this game plays like just another place where you can pull cards from. Like recursion has become so prevalent and so strong in this game, and that's kind of why Skorpios exists. Like this ability is not that good. In fact, that's the weird thing about this ability. This ability is blank a lot of times if you're playing against a runner that had no interest in recurring. Like if you're playing against a runner that has no recursion cards, that has like just no interest in playing clone ship or same old thing, we'll bring up these cards in a second. This identity is perfectly blank. But this identity actually might be a valid choice just because recursion is so prevalent in Netrunner, and that's like, I think, kind of ridiculous in some ways of how remove from game has become such a bigger deal as more cards have come out just because the heap was never good enough to keep cards out of the game. These are all the cards that say remove from the game on them, and it's a mixture of corp and runner cards, and some of these aren't recurable, and remove from game is a good thing because it makes sure that you can't recur them. But like, check this out. It's actually organized by the time they came out, and there's one creation and control card that's removed from game, then Jackson Howard, and then basically Kronos Project came out, which was the first card that made remove from game like a scary thing. This was an agenda that if you could score was actually really strong in some metas. I played this in Canadian Nationals, won me a whole bunch of games. But otherwise from that, like from Order and Chaos on and like all these cycles, like this is how many cards have come out so far that have the terms removed from game, as opposed to like the 3 cards that came out before Order and Chaos. So remove from game has become such a big thing, and that's largely as like a release valve or a reaction to how good recursion is in this game. It's really good. So what runners are running recursion? Most of them. In fact, most of them. And that's because a lot of recursion options are very vanilla, and every faction has some access to some really like compelling recursion options. This is the same old thing. You'll see this often out of almost everyone, but you probably mostly see it out of Criminal. And same old thing, you play this for no influence, you put it on the table for no cost, and then you can spend 2 clicks, which is a lot, but you play an event. You pay 1 click to install this, but like 2 clicks to play an event from your heap isn't too bad at all, because imagine just drawing that event and then playing it. Yeah, you play another extra credit to install this thing, but it's honestly not too bad. And people are recurring really strong cards with same old thing. They're recurring their count siphons, so you can spam this over and over again as long as you have same old things, which you can easily put 3 in a deck. People used to be playing this to spam blackmail, but blackmail now is less common because of the most wanted list, thank God. Another very common way that both of these cards recurred, but another really good recursion piece was Deja Vu. And Deja Vu lets you recur anything. It's the universal tutor, the universal recursion card, excuse me. And it's not that expensive to play. It also recurs 2 viruses, which was an issue in Noise, but more importantly, if you were scared of Parasite, this card says pay 2 credits to get 2 Parasite in your hand. And that's an issue when Cipher was everywhere, and it maybe is an issue still now, I don't know. But like recursion's really common, and on the Shaper side you had 2 really big recursion cards. You had Clone Chip, which this used to be 2 influence, it's now 3 influence with the most wanted list, but for 1 credit you could pull a program at instant speed back from your heap. That's huge. That was way too much utility for 1 card. And then on top of that you have Levy AR Lab Access, which is probably the most important recursion card in the game currently. A lot of decks are playing this. It's a nice reset button that lets you go through your deck again. Your deck is generally better the second time through because you've installed all the programs and the hardware, so it's generally just multi-access and economy. It's 3 influence. It's a bit expensive, but like this card is such a big deal. It's in so many decks, and now it's kind of being threatened by Skorpios in theory. So whenever a runner card is trashed, you may remove it from the game. It's only once per turn. So how is a card trashed? There's a couple ways. Yeah, there's a couple ways to do it. Firstly, if a runner plays an event, so I think a count siphon's an easy one to understand. If the runner plays a count siphon or any event, the action, like the text on the card, the ability on the card fires, and once it's completed, so for a count siphon, it's completed once the run on HQ ends, or either by being a successful run or not successful run, then after it ends, the count siphon goes into the heap. At that point, as long as you haven't removed a card from the game so far on this turn, you can remove a count siphon from the game. And that's good, because if the runners playing same old thing, they're not ever going to be able to play that account siphon again. So anytime an event finishes, even if it's something like a Sure Gamble, that's the idea. Event finishes, gets put in the heap, you can remove it from the game. You're not going to be able to stop the count siphon, but you're going to make sure it's not going to come again. That's one way. Second way is through damage. Just damage. It doesn't matter what damage you're doing, you can always trash cards. Like net damage. If a net damage fires, pull a card from hand, you can see what it is, it's going to hit the heap, you can remove it from the game. For things, this is the same for meat damage and brain damage, mind you. For things like Scorched Earth or any card that does a lot of damage at once, you get to take all 4 cards out of their hand, and then you can pick one of those to throw out. Technically, the 4 cards in Scorched Earth, you have to pick them one at a time. It generally doesn't matter, but that's technically how you do damage, and you don't need to make a choice one at a time. You can pull out 4 out and then choose your remove from game ability. Thirdly, I think the only other way is if you trash an installed program, or sorry, you trash anything installed. So let's just pull up Helion, I guess. If you trash an installed card, you consider trashed it, and you can remove it from the game with something like Helion Beta Test. There's also a lot better ways to do that. We'll be talking about them shortly. What's important to understand is that at the end of the turn, if the runner has 6 cards in hand and their hand size is 5, and then they throw out 1 card from their grip, that is not considered trashing a card. That's considered discarding a card. So you'll never have to be worried about Skorpios firing when you're discarding a card at the end of your turn. And that's a really big deal. A lot of people might not realize that. Yeah, so that's what Skorpios does. How good is this ability? I'm not entirely sure. I've done a bit of testing and it hasn't been very fantastic. I understand how strong Skorpios is. We're largely going to have to talk about the next card that we're going to talk about right after this. We're doing the cards in a just slightly odd order, but that's that card basically kind of says how good this thing is. And that's the problem right now with Skorpios. 40-15 is a good start, but the idea is that if the runner was never going to recur, this is a blank ID. It's just frankly an entirely blank ID. Now, if the runner was going to recur, your win rate just skyrocketed, and that's the thing why I'm the least excited about this ID. I love playing Geist. I love playing Max. If you've seen this channel, I play so much Geist, I play so much Max. And these decks, I think Max is actually a better example, because Max, every turn you go through 3 cards of your deck. So almost definitely you're going to play 1 Levy, or you're going to play 2 Levy AR Lab Accesses in your deck, just because you need to recycle your deck. And especially with Max, who trashes cards out of your control. The first game I played against Skorpios, I played Max, good matchup, and then I milled the top 2 cards off my stack. I trashed 2 on my first turn before I drew the card, and I got my Levy into the bin, and the Skorpios removed it from the game. And I can no longer recur my deck, so I basically have about 11 turns to win before I have nothing. And on top of that, like all the cards that I trash on the top of my deck, if it's something I need that I plan to like retrieval run, or I plan to deja vu, retrieval run's also another recursion card, I was out of luck. I think the win rates of Skorpios versus things like Geist, who also wants to play Levy, Air Lab Access, or Max, they're just so bad. Also, any other deck that wants to recur things, like people have been playing Haley with like Spy Camera. This is also really good in Geist. You can remove that from the game. So if they Levy, it's going to be a shitty deck the second time around, and they don't generally have a win condition. Some people would argue that it's actually really good to have something like Skorpios because it is like a natural pressure like valve on recursion, where if recursion ever gets too good, people will still just start playing Skorpios. I really don't like that sort of design because it's basically like you can go into a tournament and play Max and then just get lucky and not play against Skorpios. I suppose that's with any matchup, but it's just like so polarizing where your win rate in a lot of scenarios, and maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe this is a bit hyperbolic, but I imagine your win rate against Skorpios, if you're relying on recursion, is so bad. It's just so bad if you get bad draw with Max or something like that. And there's a lot of situations where I think you just lost before the game starts. Like, it's just one of the most weighted matchups you can ever have, where the outcome of the game happens, like it's almost decided before the game. If you haven't seen, like, there's only, I think, one other really weighted matchup like this in the game that I've actually had the pleasure or displeasure to play against. Imagine you're playing a corp and you're playing Argus Security, which says whenever the runner steals an agenda, they have to take a tag or meet damage, and then your opponent is playing Jasminder Serene, who says you don't take the first tag during a run. So Jasminder Serene, just basically if you sit across from Argus, Argus's ability is almost blank. And like these sort of matchups do exist, and it's kind of just unfortunate that you have matchups that are just so one-sided if they're paired improperly or properly, and I'm not that excited about it. Mostly I love playing Max and Geist, and I hate that I can sit at a table and be like, oh well shit, this was a horrible choice, I shouldn't have brought this because there's Skorpios here, how was I meant to know? Interesting thing about this ability though, it's not like there's actually some intelligent play to go along with it, because it's only the first card that you can remove from the game. That's, yeah, the first card. Like, you can only do this ability once per turn. It's not the first card, sorry. It's just once per turn you can do it. So the idea is, if, say I have an account siphon in my hand, I want to recur it, and I'm playing Criminal, perhaps for my first click I play something annoying like what's it called, a Forged Activation Order. And then the corp's like, okay, Forged Activation Order finishes, and then they say, okay, I'll remove that from the game. Joke's on you. And now, second click, I play a Count Siphon. And since you've already removed from the game the Forged Activation Order, you can't remove from the game the Count Siphon, and now I have a chance of recurring it. So there's actually like a bunch of interesting scenarios in which I've been playing at Skorpios where I think like, oh, that's a good card. I do kind of want to remove that from the game, but I'm also pretty sure that the runner's going to run and hit a piece of ice that does a trash subroutine, or they're going to hit a snare or something like that, and I'd rather remove from game something from their hand. So it actually does have some interesting play and interesting counterplay on both sides, where the runner might want to bait out the remove from game before they play a strong event or before they trash a clone chip or a spy camera or something like that, while the corp also has to make some intelligent decisions where they think like, oh, I'm pretty sure that we can do better, or I'm pretty sure they're baiting me, and that's actually kind of cool. Just also reminded me, because this is where this came up, in terms of weighted matchups, Steve Cambridge versus Skorpios, which is something that can happen and will happen in a strong percentage of people playing Terminal Directive. This is just not a good matchup for Steve. It's really rough. Any ability that, again, relies on recursion, Steve Cambridge is probably the most recursion-reliant runner. Maybe that's not true. It really sucks. And I'm playing this currently in the campaign, and I'm so sorry, Roberto, but you knew I was going to play Weyland. There was no choice, right? And this is really rough. Like, I've been playing the campaign, no spoilers, and Steve has barely been useful just because I am playing Skorpios, and that kind of is lame. Now the thing is, like, there's ways to play around this in theory. In fact, there's way to play around this in theory besides doing all that baiting stuff. You can also play Employee Strike. And I guess you can always play Employee Strike whenever there's a good identity that comes out. Like, say you want to play Max and you don't want to get your deck milled. Maybe you have to play 3 Employee Strike. Not milled, removed from the game. So you want to play 3 Employee Strike just so it's up so they can't actually remove anything from the game. Yeah, maybe you want to do that. I'm not sure. I don't like Employee Strike either. I think it punishes interesting deck building. It just does. If you build a cool deck that builds around the ID, it just, it gets really rough. But that's Skorpios. I think how good this is going to vary greatly. Just because it's just like, some matchups are really good, some matchups it does nothing, and you don't really have a lot of control over that. And there's not that many good ways to build this. In which this actually is poignant. There's a bunch of cards that work well with this. Let's talk about a couple of them. Firstly, and I think this one's the biggest one, is Power Shutdown. The next card is Hunter Seeker. We're going to talk about this in a second, but this does something like Power Shutdown. And I think a big strategy that's going to be attached to Skorpios' defense system is Rig Destruction, or what's called a lot of times Rig Denial. The idea with Rig Denial is if somebody has a program, like the Barrier Breaker's Paperclip, and maybe, heaven forbid, they only have one of these in their deck because they're playing Criminal, and Criminal generally doesn't have influence for 2 of these. If you trash that thing, if you trash a Paperclip, it wasn't that big of a deal because it would only go to the heap, but now you can remove the Paperclip from the game. And if you're running end-to-end barriers and your Criminal opponent doesn't have a Barrier Breaker, a Fractor, they might be locked out of the game entirely. Admittedly, there's ways around that. You can play Inside Job, Spearfishing, Femme, Charlatan, extra breakers. Like, it's not the end of the world, but there's a chance that if you are able to trash a program, it's game winning. And it's game winning in the sort of way where I think it's game winning, like, it's one of these things where if a runner is playing single breakers, like they only have 1 breaker of each kind because they're playing an Andy deck that was popular a month ago, they can lose the game flat out because there's way to trash programs that are like very non-interactive right now. Let's talk about one that's slightly interactive, and that's Power Shutdown. So Power Shutdown you can only play if the runner's made a run during their last turn. Not that big of a condition, considering they need a run to win generally. And it says trash X cards from the top of R&D, and the runner has to trash one of their installed programs or hardware with an install cost of X or less. So the idea is if there's only 1 program installed and it's a Paperclip, and the runner has ran last turn, doesn't have to be a successful run mind you, you can pay 1 and then trash the top 4 cards off of your deck. And the runner now has to remove Paperclip from the game. I think cards like this are also really good because it lets you trash things on the corp's turn, so you can fire Skorpios on the corp's turn. But if the Paperclip's removed from the game, so be it. That's a problem. I mean, it's a really big problem. You're going to mill 4 cards, but if you have something on the table like a Jackson Howard, you can save things if there's agendas in the bin. I think that's really good. I think also probably even easier than ever is Preemptive Action. Preemptive Action used to have it does have a clause on it that says it's terminal, so it's actually pretty easy to play Power Shutdown and, oh, there's an agenda in there, last click on Preemptive Action. And that's probably one of the best ways to play Preemptive Action. This is trivially easy to fire. Like, it's super easy just to Power Shutdown and then Preemptive away. It's so simple. How can the corp play around it, or sorry, the runner play around it? Firstly, if you just keep cheap things on the table, even things that you like install and you don't care if they're there or not, it's probably in your best interest just to install crap, and make sure your programs are expensive to play around Power Shutdown. Like, have a data sucker on the table, and now you can't lose your Power Shutdown. Even if you play things that have 0 install cost. I know we just said Spy Camera is not great, but I didn't have a better example right now. Oh yeah, I do. Just play Top Hat, right? Just so if they ever Power Shutdown. Well, actually, 0's not the worst, because maybe you want them to burn cards at the top of the deck. They can just Power Shutdown for 0, and it's really not that impactful. And then they'll Preemptive Action their Power Shutdowns back. Like, that's a problem. But that's the idea, is that you can play around this by having things constantly installed, hardware or programs, and you can kind of play around it. I think you're actually going to see a lot of this in the meta. This is Sacrificial Construct. Just because that's the problem, is if you're playing a Criminal deck that's running 1 of each breaker, and it gets trashed for the Power Shutdown, it's bad. You kind of lose the game. And this is for 1 influence. It's a resource, and you can now trash this to prevent a hardware resource from being trashed, or a program from being trashed. And maybe that's super important. Now, if we're gonna like throw silver bullets at each other, now Skorpios could go on the offense and say like, oh, if people are gonna play Sacrificial Construct, I'm gonna go ahead and play Best Defense, which you can play Best Defense for 0 and trash. Oh, sorry, for 2. Excuse me, and trash a Sacrificial Construct for free. So now we're just throwing silver bullets at each other, which doesn't sound fun because it's not a lot of like intelligent, I think, play at that point. It's just, oh, do they have it in hand? Do I have it in hand? And, you know, what can you do? On top of that, Power Shutdown, another really fun one that I've always been playing for a while. It's not fantastic, but it actually got a lot better with Skorpios, is Underway Renovation. Underway Renovation's a public, so it's installed face up, and every time you advance it, you get to trash a card off the top of your deck. Another really good thing about this is it lets you fire your ability on your turn, on the corp's turn. And if you mill like a breaker off the top of the deck, if you mill a really good card off the top of the deck, sometimes that's game winning. Like if you're playing a shaper that only has one of each breaker, this is really good. This also gets around Sacrificial Construct, mind you, because Sacrificial Construct only says installed program. So if you just like install advance your Underway Renovation and hope to get a card off the top of your deck, it's game winning. It could be game winning. It really could. Again, also, if the runner steals it, not a big deal, it's a 1-pointer. But if you over advance this, you're milling 2 off the top of the deck, and if you start removing cards from the game that are important, the runner's in a really shit spot. This is also interesting because if you mill the first card and it's like, oh, that's a really good card, but there's a chance the second one's even better, it lets you like kind of make decisions with Skorpios, and that's always kind of been fun. I'm definitely going to forget something here. Let me know what I am forgetting, but Caligoda TV is really good in this deck. It really is really good in this deck. Caligoda TV is something I didn't see a lot of play. I was really excited about this card when it came out. It's 1 influence, so it's super easy to splash. And the idea is that when your turn begins, you may look at the top card of the runner's stack so you can know what it is, because at any point in time, you can trash the top card of their stack. Now it's 0 to res, 4 to trash, so even if you install this on the table and you do or don't res it and the runner runs it, you can always just pop it. You can make a decision. Is it better to trash the top card of their stack and remove it from the game, perhaps? Maybe if it's a breaker that's game winning, or do you let them spend 4? Either way, I think you're on the winning end of the trade. If you have this up when your turn starts, you get to see what the top card of your stack is and think like, okay, it's not that good, so maybe I'll let it go. I think if the Caligoda ever fires, then the corpse or the runner says like, oh, and the runner sees like that you didn't trash it, next turn before you run, you should definitely run the Caligoda TV, just because the top card of your deck wasn't that good. And as soon as you draw, now they have a chance of firing it again. If you're playing Caligoda TV, you can spam these out so easily by just playing either, I guess you can play team sponsorship. I've been doing this a bit on stream, just to keep these coming back when you score your 1-pointers. Or you can also play, and I think this is much better, you can play Friends in High Places. And with Friends in High Places, you can bring back 2 Caligoda TV, which means 2 cards at the top of your deck. It costs you 2 credits, 0 to res each of those. It's very, 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 very good. If you're putting NBN cards in your deck, you now can play Ibrahim Salem. I'm not convinced that this is so great, considering you have few agendas in your deck if you're running a 44-card deck, so maybe it's hard to res this guy. But if you res this guy, you can trash cards out of hand, and that's really good, in theory. You can also play Salem's Hospitality, in theory. Like, there's a bunch of cards you can play that are pretty aggressive, that attack the hand. Like, Salem's Hospitality can be good if you have 6 or more yellow cards from your hand. You have to name a card, but once you've named a card, you can see their grip, and then the second one's easier to play. On top of that, you have things like, anything that does net damage is good. Kakugo is good. Kakugo's really good. It's 3 influence, though, so maybe not. You can play a bioethics committee. That's also fantastic. Oh, there's something I wanted to include that I totally forgot. Oh, shit. But, oh yeah, I've remembered. Housekeeping. Housekeeping is interesting. I think actually housekeeping might be a bit of a trap for this deck. It's really important that you probably run a current just so you can turn off Employee Strike if you can't score an agenda at will. But the idea with housekeeping is that the first time the runner installs a card, they have to trash a card from their grip. And they're almost always going to trash their shittiest card from the grip. So it's kind of more going to be bait of like, oh, they threw out some crap card. Are you going to use your Skorpios defense system ability? Oh, you did, and now they're going to like play their good events. So this actually doesn't seem that great with the ability, just because a lot of the times the runner's going to throw out the bad thing. So I don't know. It's a good current regardless, but I'm just not sure how fantastic it is. Just like the biggest deal with Skorpios, and the biggest deal, I think, just one of the arguably could be the most meta-defining decks in this entire cards in this entire big box. Man, this box is so big. It's actually Hunter Seeker. And Skorpios, mind you, in terms of the story of Netrunner, is a drones program. So these are their drones. This is an operation. It's a double. It's a gray ops operation. That barely matters. There's like 1 card that matters from that. So it's a double. You have to pay 2 clicks to fire this off. And it says play only if the runner stole an agenda during their last turn. Trash 1 card. Trash 1 card. It's also 2 influence, so you can actually see this in every single faction in the game. It's not like really ridiculous to think about this in any faction for 2 influence. Trash 1 card. All they have to do is steal an agenda, and most runners are stealing agendas. And then if they do steal agendas, admittedly 2 clicks and 2 credits is a lot. Like, that is kind of expensive, but you can trash a card, and of course if you're playing Skorpios, you can also remove it from the game. This card is nuts. It's super nuts. Runners are generally going to steal agendas. If you steal an agenda and they have a single breaker, again, if they're playing Criminal with one of breakers, they're playing Shaper with one of breakers, they're playing Anarch and they're playing like those heap breakers, things like Paperclip, you remove them from the game, and a lot of times you can just win the game off of that. And this is not only breakers, like, oh, I'm losing to Cipher, trash the Cipher. Oh, that Aaron Moran has a lot of tokens on it, trash the Aaron Moran, remove it from the game. I don't like Beth Coney Chang, remove it from the game. Like this targets anything. Also, from what I understand, this doesn't say installed card, so I think you can trash a card off from their hand. You can like randomly pull a card from their hand, I'm pretty sure. And arguably, can you trash the top card of their R&D? Can you trash any card of R&D? You'd be like, I'll trash the 7th card of R&D. Not R&D, sorry, their stack. Can you do that? I don't know, because this doesn't say installed card, and most of the other cards do. I'm pretty confident you can trash from their hand, though. This card's nuts. It's really nuts, and it's actually going to be a huge problem, and it's going to change deck building. In a lot of ways, the same way, well, arguably in the same way that Skorpios and just playing Power Shutdown might change deck building. Let's go on a little adventure here, the deck lists tab. Let's look at good deck lists. So if you're playing Criminal, oops, oh, how did I do that? If you're playing good Criminal, let's go back to page 3 and let's go find like a classic Andromeda deck. All right. Okay, no, this is a Leela deck. Lima, Trained Pragmatist. This used to be the deck list of the week. So admittedly, this deck isn't built around it, but this deck runs a single Fractor, a single Paperclip. Admittedly, if their dealers are Fractor, then they can play a Femme Fatale and maybe bypass a single Vanilla. But if you're playing a deck like this, and you're stealing an agenda, which, by the way, you're going to steal an agenda, you can now, excuse me, oh, it's here. You can now trash their Fractor. And if you're playing Skorpios, you remove it from the game. And I think at that point, you probably win. You probably win. Code Gates they have 2 of, Sentry Breakers they have 2 of, but it's just such an issue. And I think you can no longer build a deck like this, and you have to build around it. And that really upsets me in some ways. Like, I'm aware that this is a living card game. Upsets maybe is a bit of a strong word, but like, this is a living card game, so the ways that you're going to play are always going to change. You can't expect the strategies that you played with last month to be good this month. But this is, again, one of those sort of decks where if you don't respect this card in the deck building phase, you will lose the game almost, I don't want to say 100%, but you're more than likely to lose the game just from stealing an agenda. And sure, there were cards like this before, things like mid-season replacements. I'm going to close this tab. But cards like mid-season replacements, which you had to respect, and if you didn't respect, you lost the game. But mid-season replacements, at least, if you got a lot of tags, sometimes it wasn't lethal. Like, you could always play Plascrete, you could do things like that. And this card was a bit interesting. Finances mattered more. But it doesn't matter how much money you have. If you steal an agenda, maybe you lose your Fractor, and maybe you lose the game. Interestingly enough, if you don't steal an agenda, this doesn't fire. So how do you not steal agendas? You can play the one card that does that. Well, arguably there's 2 cards that do that. Is Film Critic. Film Critic is not a very interesting card. It's 1 influence, it's a connection, and when you access an agenda with Film Critic, you can host it on here and then put that later for 2 clicks in your score area. It's not considered stealing. 1 influence is easy to splash, but this card's not very exciting. So do people just run 2 Film Critics in their deck just because they're respecting Hunter Seeker? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe they do. Maybe they just run more programs of each type. Maybe they also have Garth's Sacrificial Construct is really good. Again, if Film Critic gets really popular, we can start swinging, throwing silver bullets at each other, and now you can play NCA Informant or Snatch and Grab, and you see where this goes, right? It's just, oh, they played this card, so I played this card, so I played this card, and it just kind of goes back and forth like that. Another way, sorry, to deal with to not steal an agenda, you can always imp it. You can always just access the agenda and throw it into the bin and then get them all from the bin later. That's totally a viable strategy. This also encourages cards like Keyhole as opposed to Medium. This isn't loading fast enough to keep up with me. Going so fast, huh? So Imp, trash an agenda when you access it. That's pretty good. I like this card a lot. Keyhole is technically better than Medium because you never access or steal an agenda. You just throw them into the bin and then later you can pick them all up. And of course, if you want to play Data Leak Reversal, you're never going to steal an agenda. Oh, on top of that, I guess this came up in the Leela deck. You can play Gang Sign. Because you'll notice that Hunter Seeker says if they stole an agenda during their last turn, and Gang Sign is never going to fire on your last turn. It's going to fire on the corpse turn, so suck it. So yeah, that's Hunter Seeker. This could be a cool utility card in any deck. Like, do you not like Aaron Moran? Play Hunter Seeker. Trash an Aaron Moran. That's cool. That's okay. But it might just be an issue that you can trash a breaker, and if they haven't built their deck around it, or they haven't played some of the silver bullets, they could lose the game. And I'm a bit apprehensive about that. Admittedly, we've seen a card like this before, and this card wasn't an issue. Oh, Marcus Batty, by the way, is pretty good for trashing programs if you want to play this in Skorpios, because you can fire trash program subroutine. But the other one that we've seen like this is Enforcing Loyalty. And Enforcing Loyalty wasn't, like, this could have been the same sort of skies falling idea of Hunter Seeker. It's admittedly much more expensive. You can trash it when you access it. It's easier to splash. It's a double again. It's a trace though. And like, there's a lot of conditions attached to this. But in theory, if Enforcing Loyalty fires, you do get to trash a card. And that could be good. Again, trashing programs didn't used to be so good because if you trashed a paperclip, it would always come back, or an MK Ultra or a Black Orchestra. But with Skorpios, that actually might keep them out of the game. That's Hunter Seeker and that's Skorpios. Together, they're gross. They're like really good, I think. Skorpios still needs to win, so you have to build an interesting ice suite that keeps the runners out while not losing early. You need money, and the ability gives you no money. It's also a dead against other matchups. Like, any matchup that doesn't want to recur, it's dead. Also, that's one of the things, like, trashing programs with Hunter Seeker is a good thing to do. And admittedly, Hunter Seeker with Skorpios is a good thing to do, but you have to understand, you can play Hunter Seeker in anyone. Like, even outside of Weyland, if you play this in HB, it's fine. Because if you're playing against a criminal, and the criminal installs a copy of Abagnale, and you Hunter Seeker it, it doesn't matter that you're not removing it from the game, because criminals don't have recursion. I guess besides, what's his name? Steve Cambridge. Is it really all going this slow? That's going to be an issue for this whole video. But so sometimes you don't actually need to be Skorpios unless you're trying to remove from game paperclip or the runner has clone chip. And that's kind of the balance here. Is Hunter Seeker is better if they're not running any of that stuff, recursion stuff, but maybe people are not going to run that recursion stuff just because Skorpios exists. I don't know. And this is going to have such a big impact on the meta that we kind of just have to see how it does. I've been struggling to make a good Skorpios deck, but admittedly, my attempts have been pretty crap. I don't feel like they were good ideas. But that's these two cards, and they're a big deal. They're really a big deal, and it's kind of up in the air to see how impactful they are, but 100% this will impact deck building. And if you don't want to show up and lose against a Hunter Seeker, you got to run ways to protect your programs, or you got to run more than one program of each type. The issue about that, and why I'm not excited to do that, mind you, is that card slots in this game are so tight. They're so tight. We're going to go back to the deck lists. But the idea is that if I have to waste, maybe that's, again, very negative. Man, the internet's slow. If I have to spend card slots on extra breakers, yeah, that helps you set up very fast sometimes. Like, it's cool that you have your breaker in hand and maybe you don't have to go fetch it. But it also lets you play less card slots to deal with things that are problems. Like, do you need your scrubbers in your deck to keep up with asset spam? Well, now you have less of a time like putting those in your deck. Like, it just hurts against other matchups when you're trying to like put all these cards in your deck just so you don't lose to Hunter Seeker or lose to Skorpios flat out. I didn't get any good examples here. Well, we'll find one. But that's the idea, right? Deck slots. Okay, this is probably good enough. Deck slots are really important. Oh, this one does 3 of each breaker. Okay, that's a bad example. But you understand what I mean, I hope. It's just that deck slots are really valuable. Every time you put a card in your deck just to like not lose against a certain like really targeted archetype, if it's going to be targeted, you're making your win rates against other decks worse. So it's kind of hard. I just wish there were more like cards like Film Critic, maybe a criminal card like a hardware like Film Critic that had more interesting play. Like, just more cards I think need to exist that counter this sort of strategy, because it might be frustrating. But then maybe the strategy is useless. It's going to be hard to balance. Let's move on. We've talked about that for a while. This is Armored Servers. This is a 4-2 agenda, 4-2 advance. It gives you 2 agendas. It's a security agenda. So again, the Archivist getting better and better every day. You get to place 1 agenda counter on Armored Servers when you score it. And during a run, you can use the hosted agenda counter for this pretty interesting ability. It says for the remainder of this run, the runner has to trash a card from their grip as an additional cost to jack out or break a subroutine. Additional cost means that they have to do it. If they don't have cards in hand, they just can't jack out and they can't break subroutines, which is good because subroutines will fire or they're going to have to hit the subroutines and they're going to have to fire because they can't pull out between ice. Just out of the bat, this does say place an agenda counter on the card, so immediately you got to think of Titan, Titan Transnational, which says whenever you score an agenda, put 1 extra power counter on it. So if you score this Armored Servers in Titan, you get 2 abilities to use this, or 2 times to use this. Also really fun, is that if you have 2 counters on him, you can use 2 of those counters on the same run, which says for the remainder of this run, the runner has to trash 2 cards from their grip as an additional cost, and that's incredibly good. Now, the original comparison, or the media comparison with this card, is with a very, very good card called Nisei Mark II. Oh, if I nail that the first time, it's going to be fantastic. All right. So Nisei Mark II is very similar to this. It says +1 counter on it when you score it, and then you can use the counter at any paid ability window to end the run. Now, Armored Servers doesn't end the run, but it makes it harder to get into a server, which makes it very comparable to Nisei Mark II, but I think inherently a ton worse. A lot worse. It's attacking hand size, which is abstractly good if you're trying to kill the runner. Cards like Scorched Earth, which is a very common Weyland card, it does 4 damage. So if a runner has 5 cards in hand and they are tagged, it's very hard to kill Scorch unless you have multiple Scorched. Now, if the runner ends their turn with 2 cards or 1 card in hand, it gets a lot easier to kill the runner. May it be through Scorched Earth, or even things like Punitive Counterstrike get interesting. Like if you protect a 5/3 agenda with Armored Servers, and then they end their turn with 2 cards in hand, you can Punitive Counterstrike them, and that's actually maybe okay, because Trace 5 is already pretty good. Now, this is a very nuanced ability. It's incredibly nuanced, because you have to choose when to use the counter, and how good this is almost entirely dependent on the ice, and this is where I think this card slightly falls apart, and it's not as good as it might look at first, just because it's really hard to build a really good server for this thing. So if you fire this ability, the runner can do 2 things. They can either break everything and keep going and hope they have enough cards and enough subroutines to get through everything, or they can just end the run as soon as possible and run again. And I think run again is probably the best strategy against this, and admittedly, if one of these is scored and has a counter on it, now the runner has to think like, oh, I always am going to need a second click to charge the server, so running 4th click, or last click, sorry, is pretty bad. And like what... So what kind of ice do you put this? What did you put on your scoring remote? Let's start with like a really simple thing. Let's say you have Spiderweb on your scoring remote. Spiderweb is a pretty good barrier. You can also play this with Hive, but Hive is going to be as good as Spiderweb because you had to score this Armored Servers. And Armored Server now says, I use a counter. So your options are either spend 3 cards from your hand to get through a Spiderweb, or just end the run. Like you'll just say, okay, I'm not going to break and I'll end the run, and you lost the click, and then you run again and Armored Servers is no longer active. So that does nothing. So in theory, you want to use this on cards that don't have end the run subroutines, but have subroutines that are very impactful and matter, that if you let them fire, it's going to be an issue. And there's not that many ice like that in Weyland. There really isn't. I think the best one's Archer, kind of, abstractly. But the thing with Archer is, if Archer fires, or sorry, I'm running through an Archer and you use an Armored Servers, I will let you gain 2 credits, because I don't want to trash a card. I'll break the 2 trash programs, and then I'll just let you end the run. So I only have to break 2 subroutines. Admittedly, it's on a 6 strength piece of ice. But basically, you use your Armored Servers token so that I threw 2 cards out of hand and had to run again. That's not fantastic. So any card with an end to run is really bad. Now you have other things like Veritas, like cards like this have been starting showing up in Weyland, and you would probably let all these stuff fire. You just don't want to discard cards from hand, so let these things fire, and then maybe just jack out right after it. Things like Mouseless, this one also doesn't end the run. It gives a runner a tag, does 1 net damage, so like you'll let the net damage fire a lot of the time. And it's very important to understand Armored Servers, you choose the card that you trash, it's not at random, so maybe you want to break this just so you don't do a net damage, which is at random, so you do get a choice in that, that's cool. But you'll let the corp gain a credit, and you'll take a tag, and you won't spend cards on that. You really won't. So it's actually like really hard to build a big server with this, because anytime if any ice has an end to run, they'll just let it fire and run again, like they'll get as close to it as possible. Between ice, like you generally only have to break 1 piece of ice and jack out. So it's actually kind of interesting, like maybe you want to let them get through 1 piece of ice, 2 pieces of ice, and then on the 3rd piece of ice you use the Armored Servers token, and now they've like committed a lot to this server, so they're more likely to keep going, as opposed to if you do this on the 1st piece of ice, which in theory gets you the maximum like payoff if they continue through the whole server, they'll just break as much as they need to on the 1st piece of ice, and then just run again. Admittedly, this gets cool with cards like Ice that have as many subroutines as you have cards in hand. So Komainu, and the thing is Komainu is 4 influence, but in theory Komainu basically says either lose your hand or lose your hand, and then you can't jack out. And that's kind of cool, but then you have to hope the next ice if the next ice just ends the run, it's a waste. And putting this 4 influence card in your deck is probably not worth it, because you have to get this on the server and then you have to score an Armored Servers. It's just like a lot of flying pieces. Admittedly, there are some cool cards that go with this, like if the runner, like if you do put the runner in a situation in which they're actually getting through the server and they don't have enough cards in hand, you can hit them with like traps, you can hit them with a Prisec. And that's kind of cool, because you can do 1 more meat damage when they access, things like that are okay. I think a really fun one that actually might be worth exploring is Self-Destruct. I'm just gonna write self, because Self-Destruct, Sometimes they capitalize the dashed word, sometimes they don't. It seems totally random. Self-destruct, you can trash this at any point in time in the run when they have less than 3 cards in hand, and you may be able to trace out and kill them, and that's kind of cool. Like, that actually is pretty funny. But all in all, it's really hard to make a good server for this. Like, just think about all the Weyland dice. Do we have to actually look at all the Weyland dice to piece this together? Maybe that's actually worth doing. Ice, side, faction, Weyland. Like, it's pretty hard to make a compelling server in which you have to break it. There's just not a lot of ice that you have to break all of it, or it's going to be an issue. Right? Like Asteroid Belt, you let it fire. Bailiff, let it fire. Bloodletter, yeah, you probably let it fire. Maybe, actually. Builder, you don't break. Bulwark is an issue, but you just maybe break one and then end the run. Burk Bugs, joke. Like, there's just so many things that you end the run, and that's the problem, is that Weyland Ice either comes in 2 sides, has annoying taxing things that, like, don't matter in theory, or end the run. So it's really hard to make a good server around this. Like, look at all this stuff. None of this stuff matters. It really doesn't. So I'm not sold. I'm not entirely sold. It's an interesting 4-2 for sure, and when I saw this card, I was like, whoa, what can you do with it? But after playing with it, it's really hard to make it meaningful. It really is. If there's ways to do cool things with this, and there might be once more ice comes out in the near future, more upgrades that kind of combo with it, more ways to punish hand size, that can be good, but it mostly largely says the runner throws out 2 cards, runs again, and that's not fantastic. Considering there's good 4-2s in Weyland, you have Oaktown Renovation, right? This is Illicit Sales. This is a 3-1. It's an expansion agenda, which is something you see a lot in Weyland. And it says, when you score Illicit Sales, you may take 1 bad publicity. Gain 3 credits for each bad publicity you have. Okay, so off the bat, if you score this as a 3-1, you take 1 bad pub and you gain 3 credits. How much is the bad publicity worth? I'll let you in on a secret. It's not 3 credits. Compare this to Profiteering. And admittedly, Profiteering will cycle out in 4 months, right? Yeah. But Profiteering, you can score this, and you can pick how many bad publicity you want, but you're getting 5 for bad publicity. So if you want to just go all in the bad pub, you can score Profiteering and get 15 and 3 bad pub, or you can score Illicit Sales and get 1, or get 3 credits and get 1 bad pub. It's way worse. It's like just a lot worse. Either how much you're getting per bad publicity, or how much money you're getting overall. Now, interesting, Illicit Sales, it does get a lot better if you score it after you have bad publicity. Like, say you have a Profiteering already scored, you already have 3 bad pub, and then you score an Illicit Sales. Now you're going to get a 4th bad pub, and you're going to get 12 credits. It is inherently worse than scoring another Profiteering, as long as you're not scared of getting all the bad pub, but it technically gets better after you scored bad pub. Pretty reasonable way to do this is, maybe reasonable might not be the right answer or right word. Oh, no, wrong one. Shit. After you score a hostile takeover from hand, you can now score an Illicit Sales, get another bad pub, gain 6 credits. And that's okay. But already, like, Illicit Sales is inherently a lot worse than hostile takeover. Hostile takeover you score from hand, and you get a bad pub for 7. And Illicit Sales gains 1 bad pub for 3. So I think the most important thing you understand here is this card is really crap unless you're playing in a deck that already has or plans to get a lot of bad publicity. Because if you're just trying to play a 1-point agenda that gets you money, Hostile Takeover is inherently a lot better. This also is a when you score ability, so in theory you could score it early, and then later on in the game when you have a lot of bad pub, you can play 32-7. You can play 24-7 New Cycle, and then fire the when scored ability. You have to sacrifice an agenda, but maybe you get a lot of money. Doesn't sound fantastic, but the option is there, so explore it. How does that not work? New Cycle? So this hasn't appeared, like this whole there's meant to be an archetype, from my understanding. Like, there always seemed to like there might be an archetype in which bad publicity was good for the corp, and you would actually profit off of getting bad publicity. Interesting little flavor in the old Netrunner. If you got 7 bad publicity as a corp, you lost the game. I think there's not enough cards on the runner side, or sorry, on the corp side, that actually reward you for getting bad publicity. So far, all the bad publicity thing has been associated either to like rezzing some kind of slightly undercosted but largely crappy ice, or getting money. And again, bad publicity is so good for the runner. Bad publicity is 1 credit for every run. So in theory, if you have 1 bad publicity, it's like the runner has an installed Desperado, and that's fantastic. So you really need to get better value out of your like your bad publicity. IRS exists. There's no way I spelled that right. Oh, nailed it. And IRS theory is like one of the only cards in the game that punishes bad publicity. It says if the runner hits this, they lose 1 credit for each bad publicity. So as long as they're not running Yogg, it basically negates their bad publicity. Immediately you have to install this though on a server. It gets really cool when you stack 2 IRSs because then this has a lot of subroutines, and that's actually kind of cool. So they lose their bad publicity twice. But this just never. There's just not enough cards that support bad publicity or like reward or let you get rid of it. Letting you get rid of it is also technically another option with illicit sales. But again, illicit sales isn't good unless you have a lot of bad publicity. So it doesn't seem like a feasible way to go along. I think the one we have is like what, witness tampering, that you pay 4 credits to get rid of 2 bad publicity and 2 clicks. So like this gets you 3 for 1 and then you remove 4 for 2. So it's not even worth it. But again, illicit sales only works. It's only good when you run a lot of bad publicity. I just don't see it yet. Bad publicity seems to be less of a problem if you're running a trap deck, something like an Argus security deck. And again, it's also good if you're running 1-pointers, where you don't care if the runner has that much money to run because you're not running a lot of ice or your ice is really taxing in other ways. But it's all going to come down to tracing and tagging and traps. And that's the only way that I can see bad publicity being good, because if you're actually running ice and trying to tax the runner out and you give them 4 bad publicity, they're going to be running through most of your stuff for free. Admittedly, a lot of the Weyland ice has got better than we've ever known, so bad publicity is getting less amazing as it used to be in Weyland, where the idea is if the corp had, or the runner had 1 bad publicity, they were breaking through your crappy ice walls for free. And I don't think you need to put ice wall in your deck anymore. So it's getting a bit better to give out bad publicity, but still like an issue. I don't get this agenda. We just need more support for bad publicity, and once that happens, maybe it's okay, but it's a 3-1, it's not going to help you win, so you need to put it in a trap deck, and it's just the payout is not good enough until, again, you get about 4 or 5 bad publicity, and even at that point, like, if you have 5 bad publicity, this thing gets you 15 credits, which is the same as playing profiteering, so I'm not sure. This is Graft. Graft is a 5/3, so that's a big old agenda. It has no subtype, and it says when you score Graft, you may search your R&D for up to 3 cards, reveal them and add them to HQ, shuffle R&D. Yo, this is wacky. So again, Netrunner, not Netrunner, FFG has been like really bad with editing and copywriting and templating on Netrunner cards as of recent. So this card actually says, and you probably have it like this. I'm not sure if I'm gonna be able to hold it into the camera. It's not gonna focus, is it? But the idea is that this card actually says when you score Graft, you may search your deck for up to 3 cards. And David Duplex, the guy who was like, he's been uploading these fantastic scans. Thanks, David. He actually photoshopped this together where he changed the word deck to R&D. I'm not sure why he did it exactly, but he did a pretty good job. Like, that looks legit. But it doesn't say that. This card actually says deck on it, which is not a thing that's generally referred to in the rules, let alone the next sentence of this card says shuffle R&D and doesn't say shuffle your deck. So not only is it inconsistent in rules, it's inconsistent on the same card. And like, come on, FFG, why is this still happening? So how good is this agenda? Well, firstly, like I talked about in the HB video, people are very apprehensive in the competitive scene of Netrunner to run 3-pointers, just because having 3-pointers in your deck makes it so easier for the runner to win the game, either off of lucky accesses, or just the amount of access they have to get to win is way, way smaller. Again, if you run only 2-pointers, they need to steal 4 agendas. If you run 3-pointers, they can win the game by stealing 3 agendas. Okay, so it's already going to be an uphill fight for this 3-pointer. How good is the ability? So when you score this, right then at the moment, you have to get up to 3 cards. Up to is actually a really good clause on this card, and then reveal them and add them to HQ. So you can tutor anything in your deck. And that's something Weyland's actually been pretty good at classically. Consulting Visit is a card that lets you tutor anything or any operation, which is fantastic. But this lets you tutor agendas, operations, events, upgrades, not events, they're from the runner's deck, but it lets you tutor just about anything. And that has a really value to it, because a lot of Weyland decks are running combos. The idea is that maybe you have to play Sea-Source. Oh, that's going to show up a lot of things. You want to play Sea-Source and then play 2 Scorched Earths. Admittedly, this is not a good combo anymore because people are running Aaron Moran, but that's the idea, is that any 3-card combo, maybe you're running Mid-Seasons and then Shoot the Moon and Blue Sun. Like I'll pull up Shoot the Moon because it's fun. But it lets you get access to that sort of stuff. Now, there's one thing about this that exists on some of the other Weyland cards and not all of them that I really don't understand and don't like. And it says you may search your R&D for cards and then you have to reveal them. So you have to show the runner what you've revealed. In some ways that's cool because it's like really intimidating and very on brand for Weyland, where you're like, yeah, this is what we're doing. It's public. Oops. And Weyland is a public company, which is kind of cool. But in other ways, you're kind of like, unless you're capitalizing on this knowledge where you like show them agendas and your hands full of snares, you're not going to get, like, it's technically in your best interest to not show the runner in the majority of cases, because they're going to be able to play around what you're drawing. And what's really frustrating in some ways is that the future is now exists, and this is a 3-1 agenda that says the same ability. When you score it, get 1 card, but you don't have to show it. Again, like, they could have just copy pasted this text and they didn't. But you don't have to show it, and that's a big deal. And I'm a big proponent where if ever you have to find a card in your deck and put in your hand, if it can be any card in your deck, I don't think there's a reason besides theming, or maybe you have to balance the card, in which you have to show it. Other cards, like things like a special order, in which you have to pull an icebreaker specifically, that makes a lot of sense. They have to show the corp what you've pulled from your deck, just so they can verify that you're not cheating. But with cards like Graft, there's no reason for you to cheat. Like, it's you can take anything anyway, so just showing them is a strong disadvantage to this card in the majority of cases, unless you want to play mind games, which is pretty hard to actually capitalize on. So that's kind of a bummer that these Weyland cards always have been, you have to reveal the card. I just don't get it. Now, when you score this, it's a 5-3 agenda, so a lot of times you're going to install advance this thing, and then next turn you're mandatory draw, and then you'll advance and score it. So in most cases, you're going to score this agenda when you have somewhere between 4 to 6 cards in your hand. And if you're going to pick 3 cards and add them to your hand, and now you have 9 in the worst case scenario, you're going to discard 4 cards. Which either means I hope you don't have agendas in your hand, or you're going to throw out some other crap you had in your hand. Admittedly, if you get like stuff from your deck, your hand's now probably better, so it's not terrible. But like getting 3 cards suddenly is really clumsy. It really is really clumsy when you're holding on to other combo pieces. I've been playing this agenda, and when I've scored it, a lot of times I've tutored 2 cards. Sometimes I've either tutored 1 card, which is kind of unappealing. You can, in theory, play this with hand size buffing cards. Things like Research Station. Never really saw play in Weyland, but now there's sort of a reason to do it. This increases your hand size by 2. Research Station, yeah, that's right. So maybe that helps, but yeah, it's actually really difficult. Now, I think the reason why I'm never going to be excited about this card is, at least for the next 4 months, we have Project Atlas. Project Atlas is a 3-2 agenda. That's a really good ratio in this game. And it says every time you over advance it, you can play 1 token on it. And you can use this token, this hosted agenda counter, at any point in time in the game to search R&D for 1 card, reveal it, again, I don't know why that is there, and add it to HQ, shuffle R&D. In theory, if you install Project Atlas and over advance it to 5, you get 2 tokens on it. And at any point in the game, you can use individually those tokens to pull the cards when you need them and when you want them. Graft would have been so much better if it says when you score it, put a token on it, use the token to fire the Graft ability. It would be so much better, and right now it's actually pretty clumsy. And if I want to play a card that tutors agendas, I'd much rather play Project Atlas and even advance this up to 4, advances to 5. It also gets really good in Titan. And then be able to use this ability where you can pull combo cards at speed. Because at speed is infinitely better than pulling them all at once. Because now you can play this, like, you can shuffle your deck in the middle of indexing by tutoring a card. You can, if they're keyholding in on your 4th click, you can grab a card out of your deck. Like, it's just so much better. And Weyland already had a way to like pull cards out of their deck, and you can over advance this and make it like a Graft. I know it's not a 3-pointer, it's a 2-pointer, so you have to put more agendas in your deck. But like, this is not an ability that's new to anyone, and especially not new to Weyland. And I think 3 agenda point in your deck is still a liability that's not worth playing. And if you wanted, there's better 3-point agendas in Weyland. It's just such a shame that this didn't have hosted agenda counter on it, so it would work similar to Project Atlas. Interestingly enough, we do have the full suite, where we have the Future Is Now as the 1-pointer. We have, which only pulls 1 card. We have the Atlas, which in theory pulls 1 or 2 cards, how much you over advance it, and then we have this one that pulls 3 cards. That's kind of cool, but again, it's not an interesting design, and I'd much rather play Project Atlas and over advance it. If I can score a 5-3, I can score Project Atlas with 2 tokens on it. Let's move on. This is a legal arms facility. It's a asset, it's a facility, it's illicit, and it's 3 to res, 6 to trash, making it one of the most expensive assets or upgrades in the game to trash. And it says if the runner trashes a legal arms factory when it is installed, take 1 bad publicity. That's the illicit part of it. Generally, illicit cards always said gain a bad publicity when you res it. This one's different. And it says when your turn begins, gain a credit and draw a card. It's also only 2 influence. That's an interesting card, huh? I actually really like Netrunner cards that have guns on them. Just because we don't see guns often. Whenever we do in Netrunner, they have like a pretty strong impact, and maybe that's because we don't see them that often. And I'm really glad to see some of these cool like cyberpunk weaponry. As much as this game hasn't been about like direct violence. This is a really weird card. So if you put this down, you res it for 3, which is kind of expensive. Admittedly, the trash cost is pretty high, but on the first turn it fires, you're gaining a credit and drawing a card. So you paid 2 credits and a click to draw a card. Again, if that goes off a next click, now you paid 1 credit to draw 2 cards, clicklessly drawing cards, sort of, and then it gets better and better as it goes. Now this is the sort of card, any card that draws cards, specifically any asset that draws cards, and we've seen this before with things like Estelle Moon that came out on the HB side, and things like Sensi's Actor Union, which is a card that I'm not a big fan of. Those cards are really, really good and worth looking at because the best thing you can do in a deck that runs 22 assets is play an asset that lets you draw cards so you can install more assets. Now again, if the runner can't keep up with the original assets, they can't keep up with the assets you installed. So in theory, this looks like a really good card in an asset spam deck. I don't think that's the case though, because bad publicity is one of the worst things you can give to the runner in an asset spam deck. It really is. Just because the asset, basically if you give the runner bad publicity, it basically decreases the trash cost of every single card in your deck. And that's a substantial amount of, that's like a substantial amount of savings for the runner and can be the difference easily between the runner keeping up with your 3 assets or 2 assets a turn and not. So in those cases, this card looks a lot like saying, do you want to pay 6 credits for to get a bad publicity? And a lot of times I would want to pay 6 credits to get a bad publicity, let alone stop you from getting credits and getting cards. Yeah, that's interesting. This card goes really well in theory with Gagarin Deep Space, because Gagarin Deep Space makes it in theory 7 credits to trash, which is pretty substantial. That's really a lot of money to trash. But I think you would trash it. Now, Elizabeth Mills is cool with this card, and most asset spam decks can recur things. So again, if they do trash a legal arms facility, you can generally bring back your Elizabeth Mills with things like Friends in High Places, and then you can remove the bad publicity for 2 credits. Maybe that's worth it. But I think this card isn't particularly well suited to a deck that wants to tax out the runner by tax them out by making them run a lot of different things, because giving them bad publicity can be an issue. As good as drawing cards are for that archetype, it doesn't seem that fantastic. So what can you do with this card? I think this card is actually fine if you just put it in a server sometimes. If you just put this in your protected server and res it, it gets you cards and credits. Admittedly, a lot of decks can't deal with drawing cards, like drawing too many cards, because you're going to mandatory draw and then you're going to draw. And so you're going to have to be able to play things with this card, so you're going to get agenda flooded faster. And then for that reason, maybe it's bad that you have this in your scoring remote, because now you're agenda flooded and you need to put your agendas in there, so that seems a bit weird. I've seen people play this in Blue Sun. I'm not convinced it's fantastic, but at least that's interesting that you can play this, res it, gain a credit in a card, and then bounce it to hand. That's technically okay, and then maybe this actually stays for a couple turns before you bounce it, but the 3 res cost is actually pretty expensive. Yeah, I'm not sure. 2 influence means you can also play this anywhere, so again, if you want to play this in sort of the decks, and again, giving bad publicity might be good if you're playing Illicit Sales, but if you're playing this card in a deck that's more trap oriented, this actually might be really good for you, where you don't care about the bad publicity, you're not taxing the runner on money, so trashing this maybe isn't that hard, but cards and credits is probably good enough for you, and that's interesting. 2 influence, maybe you see this everywhere, but on its own, I don't think it's great in asset spam decks, and I'm not sure exactly what you do with this one. It's weird. 6 credits is also a cool trash cost. Like, that's a pretty high trash cost. So if you want to play this in Gagarin and then you want to do something where you play like Mombat City Hall, Mombat City Hall lets you play alliance cards, so you can play Product Recall. And in theory, you can product recall your illicit arms factory once you've got some effort from it, some value from it. This card can sometimes cost you no influence, and you'll gain 6 credits. This also gets better if you want to get some of that influence down by playing Encryption Protocol. But that's kind of crazy. That's kind of a nutty. That's like full asset spam, and I don't know if you want bad publicity in that unless you can remove it. But yeah, technically you can do that. Anything that has a high trash cost, you really do have to look at product recall, because this card's probably a bit better than people think it is. Maybe a bit better. This is Mr. Stone. We've actually seen the card that has Damon Stone's likeness on it. This is not it, but funny enough, this is named Mr. Stone. It is 2 to res, 2 to trash. It's an executive asset. Executives are unique, generally, as this one is. It says whenever the runner takes 1 or more tags, do 1 meat damage. VP of Retirements and Pensions, or so is that HR accounting? And he gruffly says both, as his tie and blazer. Flutter just a bit, because he's pretty well tailored, I guess. Guns also, they're very warm. Very warm guns. Again, more violence in Weyland cards. I'm kind of glad to see that. We don't see that very often, and Weyland is pretty violent. So anyways, this is Mr. Stone. When the runner takes 1 or more tags, do 1 meat damage. It's very important to understand takes one or more tags. It means if you do a lot of tags at once, they're not going to take a lot of meat damage. So if you're excited to hit them with a mid-season replacements or hard-hitting news, they're not going to die. They're just going to take one tag. And that's admittedly annoying. Oh, well, they're going to take a lot of tags. They're only going to take one meat damage. So that's a bit annoying. So the value of this card is basically how often can you give the runner one tag and or protect this or have this on the table. There's a couple ways to do that. I think a pretty good candidate in a lot of cases is Argus Security. Actually, this is not the best candidate. This is weird. There's another card that did this. I think Dedicated Response Team was similar to this. But the idea is if Argus Security, and you steal an agenda, Mr. Stone is rezzed, and you have to pre-res Mr. Stone before they hit the agenda. But now it makes Argus Security, do you want to take a tag and a meat damage, or do you want to just take 2 meat damage? And it depends on their hand, and maybe that is a tricky decision, but a lot of times I'd rather just take the 2 meat damage. I guess maybe not if you have Aaron Moran. But it was very similar to Dedicated Response Team, which made Argus Security say, do you want to take 2 meat damage in tag, or just take 2 meat damage? And the answer there was obvious. So that's slightly different. Another way you can do it is if the runner is tagged, if you get the runner tagged and before they clear the tag, which isn't very difficult unless they're running Aaron Moran, you can res the Zealous Judge. Now, if they can't trash this thing, you can basically spend a click and a credit to give the runner one tag and do a meat damage. So you're basically playing click, punch, click, shoot, click, punch. And if they can't deal with this, firstly, they have a lot of tags. But secondly, they're going to get constantly hit. So they have 5 cards in hand. You can, in theory, do Mr. Stone. You can hit Zealous Judge, hit him. Give him another tag, Zealous Judge, another swing, and then a last click, Scorched Earth, because they only have 3 cards in hand. And that might actually be a good combo. It's admittedly 3 pieces, and these 2 cards have to survive on the table. So maybe that actually works in a trap deck. This sort of Argus Security deck, where you're having a lot of assets, and they're scared to run things because they could be snares and stuff like that. But I'm not sure. This card also technically works with snare. Now, in theory, this card would work the best in things like controlling the message, because that's the one corp besides Argus that can do tags the most regularly. Unfortunately, or actually rather fortunately, I would say, controlling the message only has 12 influence, and this is 4 influence. So you're probably not going to see this a lot outside of Weyland, because you can't spend a third of your influence on a card, can you? I guess people play Caprice and HB, so maybe you can. I'm not entirely sure, but this is like really easy to trash, so I think you probably want to run a couple of them. They're admittedly unique, remember that. Otherwise, you can run Ice that unconditionally tags. You have things like Bandwidth. I think Bandwidth is really fun. A lot of times the runner will be like, no, whatever, I'll let this fire. And then you can res your Zealous Judge. Then the Mr. Stone can fire, stuff like that. Makes it pretty interesting. On top of that, you can run things like, I don't think you can run Thoth. Thoth is probably like 4 influence, right? Oh, only 3 influence. Or you can run Thoth. I think you're probably more likely to run Data Raven. And Data Raven, Mr. Stone makes it, do you want to take a meat damage when you pass this Ice? It's not fantastic. It really isn't fantastic. I think the best thing you can do with this is Zealous Judge, but that's currently the only card that gives the runner tags, like can give the runner multiple tags over your turn. It's also kind of cool if they're floating tags. Like if they're playing a count save and spam, you can get this protected in a remote. Maybe they can't get to it because they're playing Eater or something that doesn't let them access. And then maybe every time that they count siphon, or every time that they get another tag from Joshua B, it punches them or shoots them in the face, however you want to think of Mr. Stone doing his work with his hot guns. Oh, man. So that's kind of interesting, but I think it's actually really hard to get good value out of this. Generally, once it fires once, and if the runner doesn't have to deal with like removing the tags or doing something else, they'll probably run the Mr. Stone, so you might have to dedicate Ice to that, and then I don't know how you win. So it's interesting. It does make, if you have this on the table, it does make Sea Source Scorched slightly better, because Sea Source does a meat damage, and then Scorched does another meat damage. So maybe Sea Source Big Brother, but then you could just do Boom, right? So I don't know. It's okay. You're not going to see this in NBN, and that's probably the best thing. Because Score Breaking News do a meat damage, give them 2 tags, and then like hit that with something else, like a Boom. I guess, again, you don't need to do that. This is Bloodletter. And this is the beginning. We actually have a bunch of Ice in this pack, and the Ice is rather interesting. A lot of it is interesting because of the way it deals with Skorpios. Let's pull up Skorpios just so we have it in the background. But this is Bloodletter. It is a 3-cost sentry with 4 strength. It's also a destroyer subroutine because it wants to hurt programs and hardware. And it says the runner must either trash 1 program or trash the top 2 cards from their stack. It's also 2 influence, so you in theory could splash this. Now, out of the gate, any Ice that has lower res cost than it has strength is generally pretty good. And I think there's only 2 other Ice in Weyland, 2 other sentries in Weyland that are like this. One of them is Archer, and the other one is Searchlight, and that doesn't see play. So like this art off the bat, it's really good based off of sentries. So So this subroutine is actually potentially game winning. I'm not sure how much this ice is going to see play, but in theory, if you face check in this ice and you're playing against Skorpios, it can be game winning. Like, you can just lose the game when you hit this piece of ice. So the existence of this ice actually might slow down the game a lot, where runners are not that excited to run into HB, or sorry, run into Weyland without having a sentry breaker down. And that's kind of nuts. A 4-strength sentry is pretty good. Even with one subroutine is pretty good. Mimic can't deal with it inherently without support, and that's pretty great. Other things like Mongoose, which is a pretty popular sentry breaker, breaks this for like 5 credits? Yeah, breaks this for 5 credits, which is really good. It's very, very good. So on its own, like, it's not a bad costed breaker. Like, ice, like, it's actually gonna be, you're gonna have to deal with this at some point. I apologize I just said the sentence, because at some point maybe you don't actually have to deal with this. This card's very similar to Cortex Lock, where the early game it can be devastating, late game it can do nothing. And to explain how that works, if you're playing Skorpios, in early game you run into a Bloodletter, you have no programs, you're like, I'm gonna run Weyland stuff, whatever they're gonna res. Ice wall, haha. And then they res a Bloodletter, you have to trash the top 2 cards from your stack, because you don't have an installed program. And there's a small chance, and you don't have control over this, that you might, the top of your deck might actually have, your breaker, and might again have your 1 copy of Abigail, your 1 copy of Spiderweb, Paperclip, and if you're playing Skorpios, you can remove it from the game. There is a chance that you face check into this turn 1, it fires, it gets a key card from your deck, your levy, a key card from your deck, your breaker, and you remove it from the game with Skorpios, and you might have just lost. If you only have 1 barrier breaker in your deck and this fires, GG? Again, also things like Sacrificial Construct don't work because the card isn't installed, so this is just like potentially a really big deal. We've seen another card that does, or another identity specifically, that does damage off the top of your deck, and I'm not a big fan of it. The coolest thing about Netrunner and damage was that how cards in your hand related to your life points and your total. And yeah, there were certain things that could do damage to you, but you could always calculate and look at your hand and think like, oh, I have 5 cards in the hand, one of them's really good, am I going to risk a face check because I could hit something that does damage? Now, damage off the top of your deck is entirely random. And it encourages you to draw a lot, which is very good against potential Unleash that's trying to mill your deck out, because you really need to find the cards that you need to install before you lose them. And damage from your top of the deck, like, there's not a lot of intelligent decision there. There really isn't a lot of intelligent decision there. It's just like, oh, well, I got unlucky and potential Unleashed hit my good card, and then it got Arc Lockdown. Mind you, Arc Lockdown is a card I don't think you need to play in Skorpios. I don't think you need to. It's probably overkill. Now the thing is also they have a program installed in this subroutine fires because all they have is a Mimic. You can trash a program and then remove it from the game with Skorpios, and that also could be game winning. So on its own, this ice seems really, really good. It's something that you probably have to worry about face checking. It doesn't seem like the kind of ice that people are going to run 2 or 3 of in their deck just because it's, at some point in the game, it's not that great. And that's the interesting thing about this. I've been playing with this ice, and late game, when the runner has all the programs installed and their deck just has stuff in it they don't necessarily need, they might just let this fire and might mill the top 2 cards of their stack. Admittedly, that gets interesting, where if this has to fire and it's like later in the game and you have like 4 cards in your stack and you know one of them is your Levy AR Lab Access that's going to let you recur your deck, you might actually just trash a program. Like, admittedly, that's terrible against Skorpios, but I guess in other decks it might be good. I think this card's only good in Skorpios for what that's worth, just because trashing and removing a breaker from the game, again, I guess it depends on if people are running recursion or not, and it's so hard to judge that. This ice is good. It's a scary face check. People might have to respect this, might have to be able to break sentries when they check. And again, it's a sentry breaker. It's a program trashing subroutine that matters when you don't have programs installed. And we haven't seen that. Like, you can always face check into Weyland and hit a Colossus, something we're going to talk about next. But you can also hit something like a Sapper and it'd be like, well, I have no programs installed. I don't give a shit. And that's what criminals do a lot, right, when they don't have breakers installed. And now this one will be like, well, you didn't have a breaker, so it's going to fire, and now I'm going to attack your deck. And that's really new to this game, and actually it could be incredibly potent. And again, 5 to break with Mongoose, huh? And what is it, 4 to break with Lustig? Yeah, okay, we'll do it. This is Colossus. It's 6 to res, 4 strength. It's a sentry, again a destroyer. And it says Colossus can be advanced, has +1 strength for each advancement token on it. Wow, that's good. Blah, blah, but it's good because it's paired with, if Colossus has 3 or more advancement tokens on it, resolve the parenthetical text instead. Otherwise, don't. And it has 2 subroutines. Give the runner a tag. If it's triple advanced, give the runner 2 tags. And trash 1 program. Or trash 1 program and 1 resource. It's also 2 influence, so you can actually like legitimately splash this in just about anything. So we've seen these kind of ice before, and this is actually part of a series. We're gonna call these the Seven Wonders, because they're named after seven wonders of the world. Oh, I just spelled the wrong one. Mouseless, because they're named after the seven wonders of the ancient world, or they're just called the Seven Wonders. Oh, this is gonna give me the board game, right? Seven Wonders, Wikipedia. So, Seven Wonders of the World. So we've seen Mouseless before. That card was pretty great. Mouseless. If I could just know what I wanted, that'd be good. So this is this is Mouseless. This came out a while ago in the last cycle. Mouseless is named after the mausoleum at Halicarnassus, which is this thing. I don't know that much about it. It's an ancient Greek mausoleum where Halicarnassus was buried. This is the Colossus, which is named after the Colossus of Rhodes, which was this giant bronze. What was it made out of? It's a giant metal man that stood over the port in Rhodes, and it's a really impressive thing. It doesn't exist anymore. I don't know if does Mausoleum still exist? No, that picture was ruined. Oh, that's what the Colossus looks like, or arguably looked like. Did we just lose our image? Where did this go? But sorry, yeah, we got more wonders coming out. We got two in this pack. This is the Colossus. It's really cool to see that theme. That's awesome. Building big things is what Weyland does, so this is really on point. One thing that I want to point out, I did complain about the typing on Mouseless, this formatting. If Mouseless has 3 more advancement tokens on it, do the parenthetical text instead. Do the text. And this one says resolve the parenthetical text. I think that's much better copywriting, so good job, Evichi, on the copywriting. I just said that. But they're different. I don't care. This one's better, so we'll stick with that. And it looks like all the other ones are sticking with this. So that's just strictly better. I'm okay with that. Now, how good is this piece of ice? 6 to res for a 4 strength ice isn't amazing, but one of the trashes program is actually pretty good. This is a 4 strength ice that trashes a program, and that actually is pretty interesting. Oh, so sorry to backpedal here, but for Bloodletter, it's really important that you have the choice here, because if you have a program installed and you don't want to get a trash because you can't break this, you can always trash the top 2 cards of your stack. Now, of course, if you don't have cards in your stack, or you don't have 2 cards, oh, maybe you have 1 card in your stack, you can do this. No, I don't think maybe, I don't know how that works. I'm not sure how conditional effects, partial resolving effects work. Maybe you can or can't do it. But the idea is if you don't have 2 cards in your stack, or say you have no cards in your stack, you have to trash a program. If you don't have programs, you have to trash the top 2 cards of your stack. Now, as an unconditional trash one program thing, which, again, Bloodletter is not, in theory, as good at trashing programs because the runner can always be like, oh, panic, and trash the 2 cards of their stack. Is this worth it? One very common, I'll leave this one up actually, one very common destroyer that sees play, that trashes programs, is Ichi, and Ichi only costs 1 more. It can be click-through, which is a lot less, but this is 5 for 4, and this is 6 for 4, while this one can be click-through. So maybe that's actually worth playing. Like, this actually could be good, and they're both 2 influence, so these are both, like, considerable things you could splash just about anywhere. I think this is a really good piece of ice. Give the runner 1 tag isn't that meaningful. It's pretty good, and that's actually something that the runner might have to respect. Because in theory, if they run through this last click and they can't break it, they have a tag, and then you can trash more of their resources, and that could be good. But yeah, maybe a 4 strength trash program subroutine is kind of what Weyland needed. This doesn't end the run, mind you. Trashing a program, of course, is better in Skorpios, because again, if you trash a paperclip, it'll just come back. But this is technically a fine and annoying piece of ice. Again, Mongoose breaks this for 5. Mimic doesn't break it. MK Ultra breaks this for probably only 3, right? That's not fantastic. That's really bad, actually. MK Ultra, no, fantastic. MK Ultra breaks this for 2, 3, for 6. Good. Yeah, it's good. It's good. You do, in theory, have to watch out because these are both 4. That admin at 4 messes this up, but actually it doesn't. And that's where this ice gets really interesting. Because when you advance it, it has 2 things. Firstly, it works for like Ice Wall, where when you advance this piece of ice, its strength goes up. So in theory, you can have a strength 300 Colossus, and that's pretty cool because that's hard to deal with. And these are subroutines that you generally have to break because the next thing behind it is a end the run. If you target the breaker that breaks the end the run, you're in a good spot. Now, I loved Mouseless when it came out, and I didn't realize so much that this whole idea of advancing it 3 times to get the extra subroutines or the better subroutines, I almost never do. Because that's the thing with the Mouseless, is Mouseless a lot of time is broken by runners. It almost always is broken by runners because they're actually pretty good subroutines. Not always, they won't always be broken by runners, but they generally will be broken by runners. If the runner are breaking these subroutines, it doesn't matter what the subroutine says, whether you've advanced it 3 times and it says the corp gains 3 credits or it says corp gains 1 credit. Admittedly, Mouseless is a bit different because if you advance it, it actually starts to end the run, which is super valuable, so the runner actually has to be forced to deal with this ice. But a lot of times, runners will break Mouseless regardless of whether it's advanced or not, so advancing it kind of seems like a waste of time. On top of this, we have the thing that makes Mouseless good, and it makes what's it called, dedication ceremony. Is a really cool card. Admittedly, your Mouseless has to be res, and also your Colossus has to be res, but you can play one card and one credit and one click to get 3 advancement tokens on this card. That's really good because advancing a card, spending your whole turn advancing your Colossus is really crappy. Like, not only is that 3 credits and 3 clicks, you could have clicked for credits, you could have done so much better things than advancing a piece of ice. That advancing ice has always been kind of underwhelming. And so having a card like Dedication Ceremony might be necessary if you ever plan to advance this thing. Now, compared to Mouseless, Colossus is a lot better because not only are you getting the better subroutines, which again, the same Mouseless problem don't matter that much, because if the runner's going to break the trash program routine, they're going to break the trash 1 program 1 resource routine anyways. Like, this can't fire, and this, like, they do get better subroutines, but like, they're going to break them anyway, so what does it matter? And we're so lucky that Colossus actually gets bigger in strength, because now advancing actually matters. I'd argue that if this didn't have the plus strength thing, this ice would almost never be advanced, because who cares? Yeah, who cares? It really doesn't matter. Admittedly, this only matters if it's face down and you start advancing it, and then the runner's like, oh shit, this could be a Mouse, this could be a Colossus, I don't know what to deal with. But again, if you're running Dedication Ceremony, this thing has to be face up to be advanced, so that's not going to work. I'm just super glad that this is an advanceable piece of ice where I don't think it matters that the subroutines morph, but the fact that it gets higher strength really does matter. Because a 7 strength sentry that trashes a program is legitimately hard to deal with in this game. And this ice is pretty good for that reason. It really is pretty okay. 6 might be a lot, but maybe we're getting at a point where economies are good enough with things like IPO that you can actually build like a mid-range Weyland deck that tries to score like food coats with an Ash and a Breaker Bay grid behind a server. I'd be excited to play that, and I think I'm going to try it because the ice is getting really good. Talking about the ice getting really good, oh, I thought we were going to see another card. Never mind. This is Hailstorm. This is Hailstorm. It's a barrier. It's 6 to res, 5 strength. 2 subroutines on this barrier. It says remove a card in the heap from the game. That's a new subroutine. And then end the run. And it's 4 influence for some reason. Alright. So, remove a card in the heap from the game is a really cool subroutine that I wish we had seen earlier in this game. So as we admitted, recursion has been a problem in this game, and there's not many cards that hurt recursion, or stop recursion. We had like a couple, we had Blacklist, we had Cronus Protocol that we've seen before, and these cards were like kind of niche, but having a card that stops recursion, that isn't a niche card, that you're not spending influence on, that's just like a nice include in your deck, would have been pretty good for this game. One of my favorite design cards that's come out recently in Netrunner is Macrophage, because Macrophage is a very interesting card. It stops recursion specifically for viruses. It hates on viruses in a very targeted, meaningful way, but this ice is not garbage, and it's not useless in a matchup that isn't running viruses. Just because Trace on a 7 strength Codegate can be valuable, because you can always pump into that. If you don't pump in it, it's only 1 to break if they don't care about viruses, but it's a really well designed piece of ice, and I'm a big fan of it, that you can have like a sort of targeted but nuanced response to a problem in the design space. So if viruses ever get in control, people will just play more macrophages, and that's really cool. And we arguably had that same problem with removing from the game, or sorry, with recursion. And this is the first card that's like kind of universal, that you can put this in your deck, and even if there's no recursion, it's still going to do something because it ends the run. But it's 4 influence, and it's kind of a crappy piece of ice. It's like really expensive. It's really expensive piece of ice. So I'm not excited. If we saw a card similar to Macrophage, which was okay, like the runner could always deal with it cheaply if they didn't care about recurring, but if they did recur it, it was actually pretty good. Like it was a very effective counter. That's I think what the game needs, and I don't think this game needs more arc lockdowns and more what's it called, Skorpioses. I think it needs more Macrophage meets Hailstorms. We don't have that, and that's kind of a shame. Now, on its own, Hailstorm doesn't make a lot of sense in in Skorpios, because you're already going to be removing all the good stuff from the game. Admittedly, some things can like sneak by if the runner like plays around it, or you kind of don't choose properly. But this makes so little sense in Skorpios because you're already really good at removing things from a game. So why are you paying a premium to get that on a subroutine on ice that might not even fire? So if you're going to run this anywhere, I think you'd run it in Blue Sun, just because Blue Sun doesn't care that this thing costs 6, and maybe that's okay, but I'm not convinced. Now there's two issues with this card. Firstly, Firewall exists, and Firewall doesn't see that much play. I think it might actually see a bunch more play now because David isn't so popular. But the idea with Firewall is it costs 5 for 5 with a single end to run subroutine, which is nearly identical to Hailstorm. On the Hailstorm, you're paying a premium to get that remove a card from the heap. But also, Firewall can't be advanced, and you can in theory make this like a 9 strength barrier. Again, advancing ice has generally not been that great. Maybe that'll change in the future. By the way, you can always run Space Camp if you're running Colossus. And Firewall, maybe that gets slightly better. I don't think this card's fantastic. But Firewall is just strictly better. And if you want a barrier that's just kind of big and beefy, I think Firewall will almost definitely serve your needs better. Now, on top of that, the worst part about this card maybe is that Paperclip is like the most common barrier, the common fractor, and Paperclip doesn't care that this thing has 2 subroutines on it. It'll break it for 4 credits no matter what. If it had 4 subroutines on it, it would break it for 4 credits. So the fact that this has an extra subroutine on it, if they're breaking with Paperclip, it doesn't matter. And if they're not using Paperclip, you might only break 1 subroutine, because again, if you don't care about recursion, this first one doesn't matter. And I think it's just not fantastic to put this on like a really not inspiring, but just I think overcosted ice. Like this ability, if you want it to be like a release valve for the meta because recursion is too good, it has to be on something that, while not being overpowered, is just okay. And it's just alright to put in your deck so you don't feel bad when it's useless, and it's just easy to splash. And this isn't it. I think this is such a miss on the design space, and I don't think this card's ever going to see play. It really isn't. I think Firewall will see play always before it. And if recursion gets so bad, people will just play Skorpios until that crushes recursion down. And I don't like that kind of cycle, but I guess that's an LCG, huh? This is Hortum. Hortum is actually one more of the 7 wonders ice. Hortum, I believe, is a Latin word for garden. So this is the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. And that's the thing there. That's it with all the flowers and the vines. So that is pretty on point with the image. That's the imagery behind my head. But Hortum, I'm pretty sure, is Latin for garden. I looked it up when this card was leaked. I'm pretty confident that's what it was. Anyways, Hortum is one of these advanceable pieces of ice, and because it's a 7 wonders ice. It is 4 strength, 4 res cost code gate. That's really good for Weyland. Weyland doesn't have good code gates. This is already really exciting. Hortum can be advanced. Does it say that? Oh yeah, good. And then it says, if there are 3 or more advancement counters on Hortum, its subroutines cannot be broken by AI programs and resolve the parenthetical text instead. 2 subroutines, the corp gains a credit, and it builds it to the corp gains 4 credits, and then end the run or search R&D for up to 2 cards and add them to HQ, shuffle R&D, end the run. It's also 2 influence, so you could totally splash this. Now, if it wasn't obvious there is just like, this isn't a formatting issue, this is just a grammatical issue. Like, this is just bad English, if there are 3 or more. If I submitted this on like a thing that I was handing into a teacher when I was in 4th grade, I would have been embarrassed if I wrote this. And this is being released on cards that are being printed by the thousands. This is so upsetting. Again, please contact FFG if you haven't, just very politely through the contact page and say, hey FFG, I've noticed the copywriting and templating on Netrunner has sunk into like incredible lows. What's going on? This is so not professional. I'm sorry we spent so much time talking about this, but it still bothers me. Anyways, this is Hortum. All the issues that we talked about before, where if you over-advance this ice, it doesn't matter if people are breaking the subroutines anyways. This one technically gets around that because it actually has a pretty reasonable condition attached to it. It can't be broken by AI programs. And people are playing AI programs. Maybe they're not playing them so much anymore, but like Faust used to be very popular. For 3 influence in faction, maybe it's still popular. I think Atman will see play at some time. I think Mammon just came out, and that's exciting. So having a card that you can, in theory, triple advance so Mammon can't deal with it might be worth its salt. Again, triple advancing it is not very good to do with your time, so you might want a dedication ceremony this. But on its own, this is an end the run code gate in Weyland. I don't think they have one. I really don't think they have one. Oh, they do. It's Wormhole, technically, but that's not technically a code gate. Like, that's a big deal. That's such a big deal. In so many Weyland decks to date, I play a lot of Weyland, mind you. Maybe I should have opened with that. But I've been playing so much Weyland, and I've always been playing Enigma. Just about every Weyland deck I've ever played has Enigma in it. Oh, I didn't even hit Weyland. And that's a problem because they just never had an end the run code gate. They just never did. And this is fantastic. And this is not a bad code gate. This is really a pretty good code gate as it is. Like, even if it didn't have all the advancements nonsense, 4 credits for an ice that sometimes if this fires, you only pay 3 credits for this ice and it ends the run is really good. Oh, these are all the code gates. None of them end the run, do they? Mouseless can end the run at some point. This card's very similar to Mouseless, except it ends the run. This one's more taxing, so it's better on a central server. This is probably better on a scoring remote, but it's fine on HQ if you're trying to hold that AI. I guess Orion is an end the run code gate, but let's not count that. Nope, that's it. They finally have an end the run code gate. It took this long. It took so many cycles. I'm really excited about Hortum. This improves so many Weyland decks. It's a really good card. It's fine. It's technically taxing to break. Like, if you res this for 4, even if you res this for 3 if the subroutine fires, things like Gordian Blade break this for 4 credits. So same res cost as it is break cost. Maybe they don't break the gain credit thing and you just gain a credit. That's not bad. Like, this is just a good piece of ice. If you advance it because you need to deal with AI, it's better. I don't think you're ever going to get those extra subroutines to fire, because if you triple advance it, they're definitely not going to let these fire unless you like triple advance it when it's unresed, which is pretty bad. And then they res it and it fires. Search R&D, it's very good that this says for up to 2 cards, because you can actually refuse to do that so that we don't have the problem with Watchtower, where if the runner has a big medium, they'll let you fire this, so you have to shuffle R&D so they can see more cards. This, by the way, is Watchtower. We don't have art, but it forces you to search R&D, which is a lot worse. Yeah, it's good. It's all in all a good card. Hanging Gardens of Babylon is pretty good. Well done. That's fantastic. KP Lynn. 1 to res. She is an upgrade executive. She looks to be, I don't know if she's PR, but she's talking to a lot of microphones. She's unique, so there's only 1 KP Lynn in the world of Android Netrunner. When the runner passes all the ice protecting the server, they must either take 1 tag or end the run. 3 to trash, 2 influence, maybe it's splashable. Alright, so this is a defensive executive in Weyland. You put it in the server. You have to res it before they pass all the ice protecting that server, which has the same res conditions as Caprice Nisse. It's really important that you get this right, because if you're at a tournament and you do this wrong, you're frankly in the wrong and you don't have another time to res a KP Lynn. If you have a piece of ice on the server, it's the innermost piece of ice, the runner's here. So the same window that you're resing that piece of ice, you also have to res KP Lynn. You can't let the runner pass that piece of ice and then res KP Lynn, because technically this thing had to be resed before the runner passes the last piece of ice, and the last res window for that is when the runner approaches the ice. That's your last res window. So do be careful about that. It technically gives the runner a choice where they hit, now you res the last piece of ice and res KP Lynn, and now it's like, oh, are you going to bother breaking this piece of ice just to get a tag, or do you want to end the run or jack out? Yeah, they can still jack out. Oh no, they can't jack out. Because if they continued, yeah, they can't jack out. But they can just let the ice fire. They can choose not to break it, right? So that's interesting. I think Weyland needs defensive upgrades if they ever want to be good at scoring behind ice, which is something they've been classically struggling to do, while other factions like Caprice Nisse, mind you, and other cards like Ash exist. And that's a pretty big deal that Weyland's never been good at scoring behind ice. Also very important to understand, sorry, just about that timing, is that if you have no ice on the server, you have to res KP Lynn before the runner makes a run on that server. And if you do, it fires, even if there's no ice, but you just have to res KP Lynn before they make a run on the KP Lynn server. So you just be like, oh, pre-res, go, and let them have their turn. And it's interesting, like, this card's not terrible even if there's no ice on the server. I don't understand this card. I really don't. Originally I was really excited about this card, but this is Prizek, and Prizek is neutral, so anyone can play it. Arguably, Prizek should have been Weyland. I don't know why it isn't. Res cost is nothing, so it's cheaper. Trash cost is the same. And it says if the runner accesses Prizek while installed, you may pay 2 credits to give the runner a tag and do immediate damage. So Prizek is more tricky than KP Lynn, because you don't give the runner you just don't give the runner the possibility of ending the run. And then they take the tag. Yeah, you pay 1 credit more than you do for res and KP Lynn, and you also get immediate damage. It's strictly better. The neutral version of the neutral card that is going to be in the same like cycle that they're always going to be legal together, is strictly better than the unique executive in Weyland. Excuse that. What's with that? Like, sure, this is better if they don't trash it, I guess, but... And then this one in theory is like good. Like, the only better thing about KP Lynn is technically better with cards that say if you access this wall tagged. So if you want to splash this in things like with Quantum Predictive Model, I guess, it gets better. Because now they're tagged before they access the agenda, as opposed to if you put a Prizek in Quantum Predictive Model, it matters what order they access them in. But that's kind of a stretch, isn't it? On top of that, like, KP Lynn is unique, so you can only have one KP Lynn on the server. You can put 3 price X on the same server. Admittedly, you can have 3 price X and put a KP Lynn on top of it, which is better. And what are you protecting with KP Lynn? What are you protecting? Because at the end of the day, if what you're protecting is an agenda, one of the most popular cards in the game right now is Aaron Moran. So they'll take the tag, access the agenda with Aaron Moran, clear the tag for no click, and draw a card. Like, it's just useless. While price X does the damage. I don't understand this. I don't understand why this is printed. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. It's just 100% worse than Pryzek, which is a neutral card. Am I missing something here? Yeah, they take the tag before they access. That's the only difference between these two cards. Besides this one does meat damage. Yeah, I don't know. Paper Trail. We hit the neutral cards. This is a 4-2 agenda. It's a security agenda. It says when you score Paper Trail, trace 6. That's a pretty sizable trace. If successful, trash all connections and job resources. Alright, fun enough. This says connection resources. So that means that if you score this, you don't have to trace 6 and trash your own corporate troubleshooter. So apparently that might actually be a sign that they want the MCA informant corporate troubleshooter interaction to work like that, because they actually bothered to put resources in here. Or actually no, maybe that matters for a different reason, because there could be like job hardware at some point or something like that. I don't know. Are there connections and jobs in the game? Are they good? Yeah, there's a lot. We looked through all the connections we talked about MCA informant, and there's a lot of them. They're very good. Connections are generally very, very good. I'm not going to go through the whole list just because there's a lot of them, but like Aaron Moran is a basic, it's in every criminal deck, basically. Beth Kilrain Chang is almost in every Shaper deck. It's super, super good. And our connections, yeah, some of them exist that see play. Begot is good. There's a lot. There's just a lot of good things. Aesop's Pawn Shop is pretty common in a lot of decks. There's just, the connections are really good. They're unique. Generally, they're all unique, I think. So people generally throw out their other ones if they draw into them earlier in the game, and if you can trash them, that's pretty good. But let's look at the jobs. I can only think of 3 jobs. Are there more than 3 jobs? There must be. Subtype job. So firstly, you have Bank Job, which really isn't a good target for this because Bank Job generally gets used the turn it gets played down. The biggest card for this is Temujin Contract. All right. Okay, so resources. So there's only 5. So, okay. So these are the 2 good ones. We'll bring up Algo Trading and Armitage, I guess. We got all of them. So Temujin's the biggest one, and this card now costs influence on the most wanted list. It does still get splashed out of faction, but it is basically a 3 of in most competitive criminal decks. Now, if you do score this as a 4-2 agenda, you're not getting that much out of it. You're doing this trace. If this trace 6 fires, and if you score this agenda while there is a Temujin contract on the table, so that's already like a lot of conditions, how much money is there left on the Temujin? If there is more than 8 credits on the Temujin, the runner will boost the trace. It's in their best interest to boost the trace. In most cases. Admittedly, if it puts them on low credits, maybe that's a problem because you can hard-hitting news or something like that, or maybe now they don't have enough money to get into servers. But a lot of the time, say there's 12 credits on the Temujin, 14 credits of full Temujin, they'll pay the trace. So this becomes something like score a 4-2 agenda, the runner loses 5 to 6 credits. That's not fantastic. Admittedly, NAPD is similar to that, where it says like score an agenda, the runner loses 2, but no, it actually is different than that. It doesn't say score an agenda, it says if the runner wants to steal it, lose 4. So this actually fires when you don't score it. Well, if the runner steals this, nothing happens. If this trace 6 also says when you score or when it's stolen, this card would be super good. And I think that's what this card needs to say to see any sort of play. The way that it's written right now, I think it's just so conditional. Because if the Temujin has 4 credits on it, you don't boost the trace. If it has 8 credits on it, yeah, you do boost the trace. So what else is this hitting? It's hitting security testing. Trashing security testing is really good. I don't know how much play security testing sees now. Against horizontal decks it's good. And this card will stay on the table for the rest of the game. So in theory, but I think in theory you would probably boost the trace on this thing if you want to keep your security testing. Because if you play Desperado in security testing, you'll make 3 credits back anyways the next turn. So you'll pay 6 right now. Are you going to boost this trace? It doesn't seem like a good idea. I guess you could play Making News and make it trace 6 or trace 8 for free. But like, you're spending so much money on this. You really are spending so much money on this. If you want to trash connections and you're playing NBN, you can just play a 4-2 to play Character Assassination, which just trashes your choice of resource, which is arguably as good as this, and character assassination doesn't see play. Admittedly, paper trail is better if there's multiple jobs and multiple connections, and that actually could be a thing. Like, I think the connections is strictly the best part about this. I'll go trading as a resource doesn't see play. Armitage does see play, but again, if there's like 12 credits on Armitage, maybe you boost the trace. I don't know. Maybe you don't, just because you spend clicks taking these off. So maybe it's I don't know. It's a 4-2 agenda, and 4-2 agendas in this game are very competitive, just because there's a lot of 3-2 agendas that generally get priority over them, and there's a lot of 4-2 agendas that just give the runner, or give the corporation, they put the corporation ahead instead of putting the runner behind, because there's a lot of situations in scoring this where it does nothing, as opposed to something like a corporate sales team, which, regardless of when you score it, is going to do something really good for you. It is going to be fantastic for you, and it's going to give you 6 credits, basically, in gains. So it's really hard to play a paper trail when you could be playing something that's just frankly better. Every faction has pretty good 4-2s at this point in the game. The card pool's so big, it's really hard for cards like this to see play. I guess with this thing, you could also play 24/7 news cycle, and in theory forfeit some sort of agenda, maybe a 1-pointer to fire the trace, and maybe that's good, because now you can choose when to fire this, but I don't think this is going to see a lot of play. If this card said when it was scored or when it was stolen, it would see play. I think it might, but even then, maybe not. But as of now, I think this card is not very exciting, just because I think it's cool to have like maybe it is cool to have cards like this. And then it's like, oh, it's a good meta decision, but I just don't love putting cards in my deck that do nothing in the wrong situation or wrong matchup. I don't think that's fantastic. Last card of the whole Terminal Directive, this is Honeyfarm. It's an asset, it's an ambush asset. Some of my favorite assets are ambushes. Nothing to res, but there's no real point resing this thing, because it says if Honeyfarm is accessed from R&D, the runner must reveal it. When the runner accesses Honeyfarm, they lose a credit. It's 2 to trash. No influence. So whenever this is accessed, wherever it's accessed, if it's accessed installed in a remote server, is it accessed in HQ, accessed in R&D, and most importantly, if it's accessed in archives, the runner has to lose a credit. Alright, they're ambushes. This is an ambush. It's not a very strong ambush. It's the weakest ambush in the game. Losing a credit is annoying, but I guess let's look at all the ambushes, and I think you'll quickly understand that in every faction, I think you have better options than this. And what do you do with this thing? Do you install it? I don't think you ever install it, because why would you install this thing? Why would you install this? You res it, you get no value from it. Maybe you do get value if you run like stock exchange or something that gives you money whenever you res things. But you would never install this. If the runner runs this and you spend a click putting it in a remote server, they'll run this, they'll pay 1 credit, and they won't trash it. So you basically wasted their click for 1 credit. That's a similar opinion if you just put anything in the server that was good. Like if you put a Jeeves campaign, if you put it's a Sand City Grid, like it's not hard to think of a better card that if you put it in a server and the runner ran it, they'll be like, oh, well, fuck, I need to trash this, and they'll pay 5 as opposed to only paying 1. Again, if they hit this in HQ and R&D, it's okay. They lose a credit. Or archives. And archives, I think, is the biggest reason why you want to consider something like this. Because in theory, if you have 2 or 3 of them in archive, let's just say on average you have 2 of these in archives, and the runner's Temugening into archives, they only gain 2 credits. Still worth doing. And if they play something like security testing, they're not accessing, so they still gain 6. But how good is that? It's not very good. This card, it's one of those cards, and we've seen a couple of these in the pack where I just think they're so bad that they'll never see play. And I can't even imagine a card, like I can't even think of a card that would make this playable. But like, let's look at all the let's look at all the ambushes in the game, and let's just talk about like every faction has a better one. Let's start with the NBN. NBN has news team. It also has product placement. Where's product placement? Oh, it's not an ambush. Oh, cool. So NBN has news team. If you want to put a card in your deck where if the runner accesses it, this gives them -1 agenda points, or they take 2 tags. -1 agenda points is a lot better than losing 1 credit. That should be obvious. Product placement. Product placement, when the runner hits it, the corp gains 2 credits, and the runner will likely trash this. This doesn't fire from archives, mind you, but from centrals it does, and it's an upgrade, so the runners will likely trash this. So it's a 4 credit swing on access as opposed to 1. Now, okay, let's go to Weyland. Weyland doesn't have a lot. Weyland has Space Camp. In theory, if the runner accesses Space Camp, fires from archives, they don't lose anything, but you get a credit advancement token on any card. It could be agenda, it could be an ice. And this is not a high impact card. It doesn't see a lot of play, but getting an advancement token is worth a click and a credit because that's what it costs. And saving a click is really good. So in theory, that's better. If you're playing Jinteki, mind you, you have Shock. You can put shock in archives. The runner takes net damage. That's way better than a credit. And of course, you also have Shiq. And if Shiq fires, they get again -1 agenda points or some amount of net damage. It could just be 2 net damage, and that's really good. And instead, if you want to put Honeyfarm in your deck, it doesn't make any sense because all these options are better. Admittedly, HB doesn't have much. Also, if you want to put cards in your deck where the runner hits them and they say like, oh, well, now I lost money, that's annoying because you're trying to tax me out, you could just play a Mumbed Virtual Tour. And admittedly, Mumbed Virtual Tour has like a condition on it, so you don't play influence for it. But if the runner hits Mumbed Virtual Tour and it's installed, they generally lose 5. When this is installed and they hit it, they lose 1. Now, it's also an asset, and that's like the best thing about Mumbed Virtual Tour and product placement is that you can actually put it on top of a server. So when they run that server to get your agenda or to get your whatever important things in the server, they also have to hit all this crap. And they will never do that with Honeyfarm because it's an asset, so it requires its own server. So now the question is, do you run other stuff on top of it? Like, do you run this with oh man, there's a Weyland upgrade that gives you credit if there's something installed in the server. Like, there's not a lot of good of upgrades to put on top of this. Like, I don't understand. I gotta find out what this thing is. What is this called? Type upgrade. Like, it just doesn't make sense because you're basically saying if you want to trash the upgrade, it's going to cost 1 more. That's all you're doing. You're saying it's going to cost 1 more. What is it called? I can't find it. Expo grid? No. Yeah, that's it. Expo grid. So when your turn begins gaining credit, there's a rezzed asset. So, okay, right. So you basically built a 2-card pad campaign that's still the same trash cost as pad campaign. And if you do want a card in your deck that you want to spend no money on if you're playing HB, just that says like, oh, I taxed you out 1 more credit, you can just play encryption protocols. Which admittedly, this card won't exist for that much longer. Maybe you don't have this card because it's pretty old. It's not very good. But the idea is if you just put encryption protocol and res it, now the trash cost of every card goes up by 1. And how is that different than saying the runner loses a credit? Admittedly, you might want to play this in Spark because you want to tax them out for credits. But again, you could have just put anything in the server where they ran the Honeyfarm if they're actually running it in a remote server. So you could just play Maryland campaign and then the runner will maybe play 3. It's also not an advertisement. And you put this in archives, there's just better things to put in archives. Every faction has better things to put in archives. Admittedly, news teams and Shiq come out of archives after, so they can still run them. But if your way to punish archives running from things like Temujin is by making it cost money, so it's like, oh, you only get 2 from your Temujin instead of 4, you can solve that by just putting ice on archives. You can just put ice on archives, right? Because if the ice costs 2 credits to get through, it's the same as having Honeyfarms in there, except you actually have a deck slot that isn't useless. Your ice is good. Ice is good. It's important in Netrunner. I don't get it. This card is just incredibly underwhelming. And it does things that other cards do better, and any card will do this better. If this was an upgrade, it would be interesting, but it isn't. And even then, it would be like not great, but it'd at least be interesting. This is not great. And on that kind of sour note, we did it. Hey, we did it. That's all Terminal Directive. Overall, this box is really cool. I think this box is great. I'm not going to talk at all about the campaign. I'll probably do a video in a while once I'm done my campaign. I played both sides of it just to talk a bit about it. It'll be obviously labeled for spoilers. But all in all, on the Weyland side, I'm actually pretty excited. As much as I don't like Skorpios, I think Skorpios is just kind of very heavy-handed anti-recursion design, and maybe recursion is a problem, but Hunter Seeker is an issue, and I think it's going to really not stifle but control deck building in the same way that it could, in the same way that like Sensi's Actors Union did, where all deck lists to be competitive, if Hunter Seeker does see competitive, needs to run Film Critics or needs to run this, in the same way that it used to be like, oh, you have to run Bank Job and Scrubber and Salsa Slums just so you don't lose to Sensi's turn 1. Like, that's kind of an issue. Maybe it makes Weyland strong, I don't know. You can splash this in anything, so it's pretty good. None of the agendas are good. I think the ice is really good. Colossus is fine. Hortum is really good. Just having a code gate end the run is fantastic. And I think this sort of ice is actually taxing and strong enough that you might be able to build like, let's try and score in servers Weyland, which is fun. Maybe off the grid. KP Lynn, what the heck? Paper Trail, what the heck? Honeyfarm, what the heck? But all in all, pretty cool stuff for Weyland. Dope, we did it. That's Terminal Directive. Let me know what you think about these cards. There's obviously a lot of interactions I've probably missed. These cards are new cards have come out, stuff like that happens all the time. Let me know what decks you're playing that you think are fun. Obviously, I'm going to go back to playing games on Techie.net for next week, so I'll have some actual footage of the new things if you haven't been watching the live streams in a while. But let me know what you're playing. I'd love to hear your inspiration. I'd love to talk about these cards with you. And thanks so much for watching. That was like, if you watched all of that, man, we watched like 6 hours of Netrunner content just talking about cardboard, huh? Great game. It's actually a really cool game that we can do that. This game's great. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned. We'll have more video content coming out most weekday nights. Thursday, 8:45 Eastern. There's a live stream. Ciao.